Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people who are implementing these practices, where they work, and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave. In today's episode, we're joined by Susan Barrett and Dr. Kimberly Yanek to talk about stress, specifically the stress that so many adults in education feel right now. During our conversation, the three of us share our love-hate relationship with self-care strategies. We love them, of course, for the way that they give us coping mechanisms when our stress gets high. But we also sort of hate the way that self-care is so often the primary solution whenever someone talks about resolving stressful situations. In this episode, Susan and Kim both agree that self-care is necessary. It's important. And it's equally critical for us all to take a long, hard look at the way that our systems and structures actually sustain our stress in the first place. They won't just talk about it either. In this episode, they give us practical ways that we can all start to address systems change head on. And then at the end of this episode, please stick around for our newest segment that we call Extra Instruction. We think you're really going to like it. Now for some proper introductions. Susan Barrett is a director at the Center for Social Behavior Support at Old Dominion University and a technical assistance director with the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. She also co-leads the development for the Interconnected Systems Framework, which is basically a mental health and PBIS expansion effort. And Dr. Kimberly Yanek joins us too. Kimberly is also, listen to this, she's also a co-director for the Center for Social Behavior Support at Old Dominion, and she's also a technical assistance director with the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. I mean, these two are job description twins. Kimberly develops curriculum and instructional materials around so many things, including systems change, strategic planning, capacity building, systems to support wellness, and so much more. As a teacher, she's currently focused on organizational change and adult learning. Well, thanks for being here, ladies. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Megan. It's good to be with you today.
Yeah. So today, of course, we're focused on teachers, on educators, and their mental health and well-being at this point in the school year. And so I have to say that at this point in the scheme of things, I've read about as much as I can about how I can help myself and the different ways that I can practice self-care in my life. I feel like I've got some good coping strategies, but that I would actually rather not be coping all the time. And I'd like to have some support. I want the system to support me too, and not just have me supporting myself all the time. So when we're talking about the different types of support that are available to people, like what does a commitment to actually examining what those systems are in our schools and figuring out which ones are working and which ones aren't, what does that look like to actually start the process of systems change, system level change?
Well, I would love for Kimberly to talk a little bit more about this piece, because she and Amy Flamini just did this incredible breakout session during our National PBIS Forum, and they talk a lot about that, right? I think everybody's going to gag when they hear self-care. Like,
Yeah.
There's only so much that you can do to focus on yourself, and there is some personal responsibility we have of taking care of ourselves, right?
Yes.
Healthy habits at the individual level. But again, I think what we've learned in PBIS using the public health model is that the organization needs to kind of set the stage for prioritizing staff wellness and this notion of what do we do for collective care, not just self-care. How do we create spaces for people to come together and talk, just open up dialogue and talk and process what's happened to us. And so I think of one of the first things we can do is kind of that resource mapping. and Kimberly and Amy offered that to us during that breakout session, that that's actually a wellness activity. And I'll let Kimberly talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And that's just the world according to Kimberly, Susan. But if you look at the research on stress, and stress, requires both the collective but also the individual stress response. Like only I get to determine what my stress response is. But Jennifer Moss just wrote this great book on the burnout epidemic that Amy talked about in our session. And what she invites us to think about is that burnout requires an organizational response. And so when you look at the formula for workforce stress, it's the level of demands plus the agency or the ability to navigate those demands with some voice and choice. And so why I think resource mapping or initiative mapping provides one of those just underutilized tools for wellness is because it invites us to examine how much are we actually asking educators to do. And, is it George who always says, what are you going to stop doing? And I always hear him. I'm like, yes, what are we going to stop doing? Because nobody can sustain this. So for me, that's a perfect antidote to workforce stress. When you look at the literature is let's look at all the stuff we're asking teachers to do. And in that return resource that you worked on, Susan, it's get to the basics. There are things we're doing. We don't even know if they're working. We're not monitoring them with data. Maybe they're not evidence-based for this particular scenario, or maybe they're not evidence-based at all. So I think that's a great starting point for systems.
So you've said so many things. So I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to catch up to what you all are saying, because I think there's some really excellent ideas here. So first of all, the book that you mentioned, you started to talk about something that sounded like math, that you have to take something and then plus something, and then that's what were you saying?
I get accused of this a lot, Megan. So
no, that's okay. I just want to follow it.
I know. So and Amy brought this book into our work when we were working on our session, but I love if you think of stress, It is, we all have our individual stress response. So yes, so to Susan's point, I hear this. If I hear one more person tell me to just breathe, because we can't breathe our way out of this. Yes, there's a lot of value to prioritizing our own well-being. But when you look at the data and the number of people leaving education,
yes,
that's an indication of something bigger,
much bigger,
of need and response. And that's, in the book Jennifer Moss wrote, and the burnout epidemic, she's inviting us, and I think some of the corporate literature out there would agree, that we need a systemic or an organizational response to that. We've got to change our systems, kind of like the antecedents, if you think about it behaviorally, and the consequences to really value and prioritize through our behavior, of course, well-being and healthy.
Yeah, this can't just be I was reading, it's a sentence that has stuck in my mind since I read it. This woman, I cannot recall her name, but we linked to her essay. We linked to an essay out from Ed Week, and she said it in there. So check out our Teach by Design article from November. It's in there. She basically was saying, no amount of yoga, no amount of walking I can do will actually solve a problem that has its root in a system or a structure and the way that we do business in our school. And so it's exactly right. Like we can't like, there's like endless articles written about the amount of stress that educators are under, the number of people that are leaving the profession, the lack of people entering the profession. You can't look at that and say that it's because people aren't taking care of themselves. There has to be a solution that comes from the system, and that requires leadership and a commitment to changing a structure within the organization. And so then the next thing that you said was something about resource mapping, and I don't know what that is. So tell me, what is it and how can I do it?
Do you want to take that one, Susan?
Yeah, sure. So much of what we do in PBIS is activity-based, where we bring a group of people together and we have them inventory all the things that they're doing to help support students, social, emotional, and mental health.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out we do a ton,
Yeah.
right? And this has gone on way before kind of the COVID era, if you will. We've always burdened teachers with trying to do way too much, which has caused that kind of ongoing stress. Even before COVID, education and the field of education has been a source of stress for so many teachers, because there is so much to do with not the adequate resource, not the adequate support, and even going back into pre-service, right? We're not giving teachers the skills that they need to be able to manage classroom behaviors in a very positive or proactive or preventative way. And so what resource mapping allows us to do is get input from the community, right? We want to talk to the teachers. What is it that you're doing in your classroom? And it turns out when we make an inventory of all the things we do to support students, it's way too much. And our ability to do anything well is almost zero.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, what data is telling us what's working with our kids? And let's focus on one or two things that works well with our kids and put the other things on the back burner for now and forever, hopefully. But at least can we put it on the back burner? Because it's really hard to get us to stop doing things. It's really hard. Well, oh, we've always done that. Oh, we've put so much money into that.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's not making an impact with your students, and you're not sure if anybody's doing it with high quality, like if we're going to invest all this money and all this time, then we should be checking on, are we doing it right? And are kids actually getting better as a result?
Yes.
And I don't think we take enough time to do that. So what this activity kind of does is point out kind of the flaws in the system that allow us then to make decisions about what are the one or two things we're going to do, and then how are we going to collect data to make sure that when we invest in it, it actually, we do it right, and kids actually get better as a result.
That's smart. So who do you have at the table to do that resource mapping?
Well, you can resource map around all kinds of things, and who needs to be at the table is who's impacted by whatever that domain. So if it were student literacy, then who in the district and the schools touches student literacy? Let's have them resource map. Let's get people from different schools. Talking about adult wellness, let's get district leadership and make sure HR is on district leadership. Because
that's smart.
and the people who work with employee assistance programs, because there's a rich source of data it's a naturally occurring data source that informs what time of supports are people accessing? What do we have in our continuum for all, some, and a few adults? You know, are there gaps? You know, are people asking for this and our systems don't support this? So who at the district level, at the school level, I would want to see a continuum, a vertical slice of the organization, district and schools, all staff. You know, what about our bus drivers? What about our people who work, our custodians who are working even harder to keep our buildings safe? You want, to Susan's point, to get voice that represents your district community.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I also really liked you were referencing, what are we going to stop doing? Because I was just reading this book all about decisions that we make. And one of the strategies was to create a stop doing list. And so I think it kind of gets to that. One of the examples that they gave in the book is that there was this some group in the Navy, and they were all just like, ugh, there's so many things that we have to be doing right now, and there's just never enough time. And so they said, what would you stop doing? And they said, would stop painting this ship that we have to paint all the time. And so they actually looked at, why are we doing this? Why do we have to paint it so often? And it was because of the material of the screws that they were using. So they took some time, invested in it, and used different materials so that they weren't rusting as often. They only had to paint the thing once. And so it's looking at are you doing things maybe as efficiently as you can? Is there actually an overlap? There was a practice that we did here in our organization where we started to look at the meetings that we were attending. And it seemed like we always had the same group of people attending all these different meetings, and that there was a lot of overlap that would happen sometimes because you would have maybe 2 extra people that would attend this meeting that didn't attend the other meeting. And so they needed to hear the backstory that 7 other people in the room had already heard. And so there was an inventory that we did of some meetings to say, how can we shuffle some of these things around and do things differently so that we're all attending fewer meetings, and maybe we can actually like save some of our own time. So I think that's smart too, looking for things that you can stop doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the example in a school system in Washington State who during COVID staggered arrival time because they had to do temperature checks, and it was kind of an all hands on deck. All staff were going to be responsible now for a morning greeting where they would do a quick temperature check and a warm welcome to the school building.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out there was so much side benefit to that process of that warm greeting, that warm hello. I'm so happy to see you at the same time they're doing the COVID kind of protocol, that they decided to continue that because it was so powerful.
Yeah.
Behavior issues kind of went down. People said, wow, this feels really good that somebody's acknowledging me. They're saying my name. It deepened connections and relationships, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many side benefits. What I appreciate about this story, the district recognized the value of it and said, to your point, Megan, we're going to consolidate some of the meetings that we're having because there's so many overlapping meetings, and we're only going to have 2 or 3 meetings that occur, but we're going to protect staff time in the morning so that they can be outside greeting kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they took, it was an organizational design that allowed space and time for the teachers to be able to not to go to the meeting, but instead do this other thing that had huge benefit. So again, that's a really good example of looking at a practice and saying, holy cow, this works. And then having the district come in, recognize the value and say, we're going to take this thing off your plate and allow you to prioritize this practice.
I love that. Well, and the other thing that's so great about that is that it saves time, but it saves everyone some time, and they don't have to go to a meeting, but they get to replace that with something that ultimately was probably pretty rewarding, meeting and greeting all of their students at the beginning of the day just sets such a better tone for the day than going to any kind of meeting in the morning. So, I mean, I think that's great on a couple different levels. Yeah. Yeah, I think all of these strategies are so critical because like we were saying, we can hear all day about the things that we can do individually, but I think there does feel to me to be a lack of information, or at least amplification of the types of strategies that we can do systemically. So hearing about this district in Washington is so great.
The other thing I'll just point out for a second, kind of going back, Kimberly offered, elevating employee assistance programs through our human resource departments. And again, I think that's really, really important because while we're talking staff wellness and we're really thinking maybe at teacher level, I'm really worried about our leaders. And I'm worried about their ability to navigate now. And rather than putting all of this redesign on their shoulders, I think we should elevate more of our HR department, our human resource departments, our employee assistance programs, our insurance plans that can absolutely contribute to this redesign of the system. And so I just wanted to highlight that and just call out that our leaders are also in dire need of supports across the cascade of implementation, from state to county level to district level to school level. And I think that the organization needs to be really paying close attention to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Say more about that. Like, let's talk about that a little bit. It's something that I often lose sight of as I'm thinking about this, is that I would look to leadership to say that they could be the ones that would create this change. And that's a lot of pressure too. There's a lot of it's not their only item on their plate. So what are some of those? Like you were saying, having HR included, the employee assistance program. Say more about what you mean.
Kimberly, I don't know if you want to take that.
Well, yes, leadership at the school level might look like showing employees, like modeling it at this, school level. Because I think, again, back to Jennifer Moss's article, employees can't be what they can't see. So, and oftentimes I hear from teachers to say, we just need permission. Like we need permission to say, I need a micro break. Or, I need this. But to your point, at the school level, some of this work requires reallocation of resources, and things like HR and insurance plans and EAPs, those require district resource allocation. And so, it's everyone at the level of the system, but in order to change resource allocation, that has to come at the district level. And I think HR, I learned about this from studying what corporate world is doing around workforce wellness. I think it's an overlooked resource in education systems. Like, have we thought about, there's a wealth of knowledge, experience, and navigation, if you will, that comes from someone who specializes in human resources.
Yes, it's honestly, this is the first time I have heard someone say out loud to consider having someone from HR be included on a team like this. It's not something that I personally have considered. Maybe I'm just late to the game, but I think that's a really excellent tip for people to just ask, even like, is our HR person somewhere listening to these conversations? Like, I think that's really smart. The other thing that we had talked about, Kimberly, was this idea of micro movements, which was like such a great term that I know that you stole from corporate realms, but I think it's so nice to know that there are actually like systemic changes that you can make at a small little level. So it doesn't have to feel like we're making this giant shift. What might something like that, what might a micro movement look like in systems change?
So an example at the school level, and I've actually been doing this as someone who works with professional learning, because I'm having to change my organization, is micro breaks. Like, so with training, with a 6-hour training, I used to just do one break, lunch, we do a 10-minute break in the morning, 10-minute break in the afternoon. And then I took an 8-hour class for 4 days, and I discovered a new routine that I would consider a micro movement. And it's at the top of every hour, school-wide, district-wide, we're all taking a wellness biology break. And it's anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes is what I've been playing with. But I found it to be so much more manageable, both as a recipient of that and both as someone at the facilitation end of it. We all need to do that.
Yeah.
The question we have to ask ourselves is, always to the book you're reading, the decision, what are you willing to say no to in order to say yes to this?
Yeah.
But if we're saying we value employee wellness and a healthy workforce, our values really drive our scheduling and our time and how we allocate our time.
You're not wrong. Yeah. No, absolutely. Last year when I was talking to some schools about the things that worked well, to your point too, it was, they talked a lot about how they were given the permission to focus on building relationships with their students in a way that they had never been given before. And it made so much of a difference that across the board, that's what people said worked so great in the last year, was everything that they did to build relationships and trust with the students that they worked with. And so it's exactly what you're saying. It's what are you given permission to do, and what is the priority that you're giving to the thing that matters the most in that moment. So if reducing some stress and giving people permission to give themselves a break is something that's a priority to you, make that school wide. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? See what happens. In the book that I'm reading, it's called Ooching, which is like, I can't say it without laughing. I can't say it. It's called Ooching. And the thing that's a little bit of like a nuanced difference between them is that it's something that you can try because you're not too sure how it's going to work out school wide, like if you take it to everyone. So it's just like a way that you can try it out with a small group of people and just gather some more information, you know? So if I wanted to do something and suggest that teachers do this and like take a break at the top of every hour, I might grab a couple of different classrooms and say, give it a try, see how it feels. And then, you know, in a couple weeks, we're going to debrief how that felt. And if it made a big difference, great. Now I've got 3 additional teachers that are now ready to talk to the whole school about what was so great about doing that and what kind of difference it made in their teaching and overall well-being. So it's the same kind of idea that you don't have to make this like informed, fully like every question answered type of decision. You can actually test drive some of it, you know, throughout the year and see how it goes and make these changes as you go.
And that's a really great strategy, Megan, to start small, right? Start with a couple of teachers, test it out, try it out. And that really helps when the teachers can come back to the group and say, holy cow, not only do I feel better, but behavior issues are decreasing, and holy cow, instructional time has increased. And it's only been like, all I have to do is take 10 minutes at the top of the hour. And our class decided as a community that a nature walk was kind of the best thing for us to do. Whereas another teacher might say, well, we decided that we would listen to music for 10 minutes. And you know, somebody could pick the playlist, or a couple kids got together. And I mean, so there's really simple things. I think we have to think of mental health and wellness as a full continuum. So many of us think of it as only getting help in the space of an office by a clinician, when it's these warm welcomes, it's listening to music together, it's engaging with one another, it's taking some deep belly breaths, it's taking a walk for 10 minutes. And this is anchored so much in the science of the brain, right? And what the researchers tell us, especially right now, is that our brains are really tired, and we actually need time and space to be able to take a moment, and how important movement is right now, that actually helps neurological integration, which will help with learning. So everything is so interconnected. And I think we're just beginning to unpack this in the space of the classroom. But if we can message to teachers that it just takes these like really small moves in your classroom that could have a really big impact, I think that'll go a long way in generating this kind of redesign of the system.
Yes, I agree. So what would be, as kind of this last little takeaway, if I'm listening to the two of you, I'm on board, I'm all in on this idea, right? What is something that I could do in the next week that would be something that could just start to get either my school committed to thinking about this on the larger systems level, or a group of us teachers, or the district? What's a thing that I can do that I have some initiative over to try and affect this kind of change and get the ball rolling in my school?
I think there are a couple of things. Well, one of the things that comes to mind, simply because we just came off of our national PBIS forum, we recorded every breakout session. And what I've been telling teams to do is that if you think this is a good idea, if you're really worried about your staff, what if you did a little watch party of maybe 10 or 15-minute segment of one of the recordings? And then afterwards, dialogue about what you heard, what you could possibly lean into. What are some of the small things that have been tested and tried with other schools, like the Washington School District I just described, right? I mean, there's so many great implementation examples. The other thing, we should be leaning in and really listening to our teachers. They absolutely know the way forward. They know what needs to change about our system. And it's time for our leaders to do learning walks and just talk to our teachers and do maybe some informal, really simple surveys and start there with some ideas. I love that a superintendent here in Richmond City took the time to do exactly that. And he ended up making a commitment not to introduce anything new this year, that they were going to kind of going back to that, we're going to stick with basics.
Mhm.
And the other thing he heard is that teachers needed a little bit of a fall break, and he gave them a couple of days off last week,
Amazing.
which hopefully will make all the difference in the world, just so that, because everybody's saying we are May tired, right? It is only October and we are May tired. And so I love that he listened to them, and he just didn't say, take a yoga class. He made a commitment to, and knew that it was going to, that many families were going to struggle trying to find care for their children, but said, what, our teachers, they need this in order to really survive the year. And so I just really appreciate that as an example.
Yeah. Kimberly, what do you got?
What do I got? That's hard to follow, but I feel like we need to start to normalize wellness. Our culture tends to put pride on how many hours we worked and how long our to-do list is. And I just wonder if as leaders, we start to model again and normalize wellness. And to Susan's point, ask people, stress and stress response are unique to the individual. And teachers, educators, when you look at some of the research that's available, they don't want us to, well-intended kind of yoga and all these things that are, but it's after hours. We feel compulsory. It's like compulsory activities that we must attend, which then impacts our well-being negatively because you're removing the autonomy of how I use my personal time. And once we ask teachers, look at the buckets. Okay, what are some micro movements, small things we can start tomorrow? And then what are some long-term things? And embed those into the day. So start your meetings and your mornings, like Susan mentioned, with check-ins with the adults. Explore some micro breaks throughout the day. Look at your teaming structure alignment. And if you've got, Megan and Susan on 5 teams, that's too much, these little things. And then the other bucket is long-term. What would it look like and sound like if you felt like you were able to manage? What would the workload look like? What would the level of agency? That goes back to the district leadership team. What resources would you like to see added to our employee assistance program? So I think you have to ask the individuals and not make assumptions and get in front of it, because there is a little research that says we want you to kind of know that, yes, this is really hard, and don't just come in with the reactionary, but listen to us and organize a response as a prevention method.
I love all of that. I'm all in. Well, Susan and Kimberly, we're going to link to all of the things that you all have offered up as resources in the description, so folks can feel free to check those out and explore more on their own. I really appreciate you all taking the time today to talk about this really important project and this process that people are about to endeavor on. And I hope that you all are finding great ways of taking care of yourselves too. So thanks.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan.
This is Extra Instruction, the segment where we get to ask our experts one last question about this work of making schools safer and more inclusive. With Extra Instruction, it's our hope that you'll get one last piece of wisdom to carry with you into your own schools and classrooms. Today's Extra Instruction question is, can you tell us about a time where you noticed that it was a school's or a district's PBIS implementation that had an impact on a student or a team or a teacher?
Gosh, there's so many. I'm having trouble thinking of one in particular. I think one of our favorite things to do is to go visit schools who are implementing PBIS. And we do a walkthrough, and we get to talk to teachers, we get to talk to students, we get to talk to leaders, we get to talk to all the staff. It's an amazing experience. And I can remember that I was doing a learning walk at an elementary school. And, the questions always come up about, can you help me with this one student, right?
Right.
And so, in doing so, I remember I was talking to a teacher, we were talking about this particular student and just having so many concerns and behavioral issues that were interrupting the classroom environment. And so we took a long time to talk about the entire class and classroom and how to set up a really positive, proactive classroom. And she was amazing. She, taking notes. We went through the tiered fidelity inventory. It was extraordinary. And then I came back about 6 months later, and the very child that she had described to me as having so many behavioral concerns and just needing so much support and attention actually was in a tie welcoming me into the school.
Oh my God, the whole school?
The whole school. And he was going to be in charge of giving me the learning walk for the next round of learning walks that we were doing.
I love that.
And I actually, bumped into her, and she said that because we focused on the system, because it wasn't just about the one child, it was really about how do we organize the systems into the
context,
tier
yeah.
one components, and how do we use that proactive approach, and how do I pay attention to all the amazing things that child is doing 5 times more frequently than I'm focusing on error correction, like all those kernels of evidence-based practices she implemented with support from her coach, from her team. And as a result, this student was beaming with pride about his school, was beaming with pride about showing me every aspect of what they were doing around PBIS implementation, and had wanted to wear a tie to show how proud he was of himself. And it was just one of those moments that even now when I talk about it, gives me chills. It just has such a dramatic impact on his life and the teacher's life.
Yes, I see that. That's wonderful. Kimberly, what do you got?
I think one of the latest things that comes to mind is a district that I've worked with, and they've just done such a brilliant job of not, from the very go, not launching into let's get the schools, provided with training and then we're implementing. They've done a lot of the work at the district level.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 days before the school year started this year, they started a little earlier. I got a really early phone call from the lead there, and she's like, I don't know what we're going to do. We've got a mandate that we've got to wear masks, and we don't have necessarily community agreement around, about the importance of wearing masks or the non-importance. There was just disagreement. And we sat there and we talked about, all the things that were happening and what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait a minute, we know what to do. We need a matrix. What does mask wearing look like?
Yes.
Settings. What does it look like? So there's different CDC guidelines. Can we infuse those? What about coaches for sports? Does that look different? What about bus drivers and transportation for bus? And she said, okay. And I go, but it can't come from you. We've got to get community, a slice of the community together. So she went to families and she went to students that had different, opinions, perspectives. And she went to the coaches in the district. She went to bus drivers and principals and got a nice kind of slice of the community, if you will, to say, what would it look like and sound like to you if we were coming together as a community in a school? We have differences about wearing masks. We have safety guidelines we have to follow. We have some people who have reasons why they can't wear a mask. How do we bring that to a teaching matrix, to define it? And we've been working on relationship building as a focus. And one of the skill sets we've unpacked is empathy. So how do we build empathy, skills that help us practice empathy on a daily basis, so that if I meet someone in the hallway who maybe isn't wearing a mask, there's the skill sets, taking perspective, withholding judgment, all of those things that make up empathy. Okay. So she got that done. She got feedback, put it in a matrix, sent it out to principals, asked for immediate feedback. Okay, we're good. They made posters for all the schools. They made little things. If students wanted to wear something that says, I can't wear a mask, whatever, so that we could, okay, if you see someone with this, what does that conversation look like? What do you do to keep, to make yourself feel comfortable and also to honor this person's perspective? And I just thought it was brilliant. Like, it was just we didn't go off and do something new.
Nope.
And we used all of the best practices about, to Susan's earlier point, listening to one another,
Yes.
bringing that space, a little teeny bit of space to see, and then to your point, let's try it out. We've got to launch in 2 days. And
Yeah.
together, how's this working for us? Are there tweaks that we need to make? And
Mhm.
for me, that's a fresh story, but
Yes.
just embedded so much in terms of hearing from everyone across, the district.
It's such a good example of how this is truly just a framework that you can plug in all different facets of the school day and the decisions that you need to make and the things that you need to implement. It's just a framework there to guide all of this work, and that so many of the things that we do really fit so nicely in there. Thanks for sharing your stories.